And entrepreneurs are definitely known to be innovators and early adopters when it comes to technology. So today we're joined by some incredible Disruptive Minds members. We've got Joe Dalton of JD & Co, Joanne Chidley of Beauty Kitchen, Sanjay Lobo of On Hand, and Cheryl Miller of Reboot Global. We are due to be joined by Josh Wintersgill of Easy Travel Seats, so I'll bring Josh in as soon as he arrives. And there will be an opportunity for anybody watching in today to ask questions. If you've got a question, pop it in the Q&A function at the bottom of your screen, and we will do our very best to answer them as we go along. So I think what we'll do is start with some introductions so that everybody here knows everybody else, and so that everybody watching in can find out about you guys and your incredible business. So I'm going to come to you in the order that you appear on my screen. So Sanjay, that puts you in the hot seat first, I'm afraid.
No worries. Hi, everyone. I'm Sanjay. I run an organisation called On Hand. We're a platform for engaging employees in doing good, social and eco goods across the world.
Fantastic. Thank you. And Joe Chidley, can we come to you first?
Hi, everybody. My name's Joe Chidley. I'm the co-founder of Beauty Kitchen, which is a sustainable indie beauty brand, but also the co-founder of which is a reusable packaging platform. And it's about bringing those both together here today. Thank you so much. Joe Dalton.
Hi, everybody. I'm Joe. I'm a founder, I'm an angel investor, and I'm a board advisor. And my day job is running JD & Co, which I started from my bedroom 10 years ago. And it's now the leading headhunting and people advisory business for all the disruptive startups and scale-ups across Europe. And I'm also a proud angel investor, and I sit on the board of an exciting designer resale platform.
Fantastic, Joe. So I know that you're, really embedded within the clients that you work with. So I'm hoping that we'll not only get some insight from what you're going through and your challenges and opportunities, but the businesses that you're working with as well. Josh, welcome. We're just on introductions, so I'm going to give you a couple of seconds to join the room, and I'm going to go to Cheryl next.
Thanks, Francesca. Morning, everyone. My name's Cheryl. I'm the founder of Reboot Global. I do consultancy and training for small businesses around diversity and inclusion. I'm also a business coach and mentor. So by background, I'm actually an accountant, albeit I don't often admit that, but I am an accountant. And so I'm often helping out small businesses. I also work as an independent board advisor and non-exec director.
Fantastic. And Josh, it would be awesome if you could introduce yourself to the room.
Yeah, first, sorry, a few minutes late, technical issues. Hey, don't we just love technology? Yeah, hi everyone. Really, it's a pleasure to be here today, and thanks for the opportunity to speak. A bit about me very quickly. I've got my own business, Able Move. We supply medical products to wheelchair users around the world to help with the challenges of getting on and off aircraft. It's been heightened in the news most recently, so I'm sure you've all seen that. So it's been quite an interesting time for the sector. And then I support some consultancy roles with aviation and accessibility groups and things like that. So quite a broad range of stuff that I get involved in.
Fantastic. Well, as you can see, from the industries that you're involved in, we've got such different businesses and such different entrepreneurs. But what we often find on these is that regardless of what industry or what stage you're at or where you're based in the world, we're often facing the same problems, and it's and finding the same opportunities. So hopefully we'll uncover some of those today. Look, I'm going to start with a bit of a broad one and an obvious one, but we're all sat here on Zoom, and we've spent probably more time on Zoom in the last 2 years than we ever had previously. And so even at its most basic level, technology is essential to most, if not all, businesses. But I'd love to just explore a little bit about how your relationship with technology and connectivity has changed in recent years. And what impact you've noticed it having on your business. And Joe Chidley, I'm going to come to you first.
So I think for us, we are one of the highest scoring B Corps in the UK. And what that means is that we place equal value on people, planet and profit, which is just a different business model. So when we look at the travel, for example, with employees, you know, the fact that people don't need to travel as much because they can now do it virtually, you know, supports not only the planet or people in terms of time, but also the cost and the profitability of the business. And for me, that's one of the like really simple examples that everybody should, you know, take advantage of. The challenge is that as an indie beauty brand, we deal with major retailers. So your Sainsbury's, your Boots, your Holland and Barrett's. And there's something about that personal touch that potentially is lost. How do you get in front of a buyer? How do you make sure that that relationship is still there and still valid for your particular business when you don't necessarily have thousands in the budget from a marketing perspective? So it has given us, you know, a solution in one hand, but then raised another challenge in a different format.
Thank you so much. Sanjay, love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, so technology has been really interesting for us. We're an organisation that started by connecting elderly and vulnerable adults who needed a hand for something and, you know, didn't have friends and family around with volunteers in their local neighbourhood, and we did it with tech, which is kind of weird, right? So we're essentially using tech in the same way Deliveroo would use tech to get a takeaway to someone or find the burger you want to eat tonight, and we're using it in the same way to connect people in potentially vulnerable situations. And so we've had to be incredibly careful about how we set it up. There's plenty of safeguarding checks that happen on both sides. But the idea that you could use technology in that way, completely different. The market didn't have anything like that in the volunteering world. If any of you have worked for big corporates before, you probably know most big corporates have CSR programs that have volunteering policies. The good people pay time off to go and volunteer, but the take up is terrible, like really terrible, typically 5% or less. If you're doing anything above 10%, you're doing really, really well. With us, it's 50%. 50% of an employee base gets involved in volunteering with us because we've utilized tech to make it super, super easy based on your exact location, on demand, just like everything else in your life. So tech been an amazing, amazing enabler for what we do, and hopefully that has an impact on the world as well.
Fantastic, thank you. Jo Dalton.
Yes, I think that technology has had an enormous effect on employers and their ability to enable their teams to work more flexibly. I love the fact that I can support all the working parents in my business so much more now, because they can work flexibly part-time because they're connected through technology platforms that we use. And then if I think about all of my clients, they are fast growth tech companies across Europe. For the first time ever post the pandemic, they are suddenly thinking about talent being everywhere. So in terms of the sorts of people that we'd be able to headhunt pre-pandemic and before sort of mass technology adoption, it would have to be people that could get to a physical office, and that would discriminate, and that would mean that lots of talent just wouldn't be able to apply. And now we have access to talent, and the clients that we work with have access to talent all over the world.
Thanks, Jo. Josh, what about you? How's your relationship with technology and connectivity changed over the recent years?
Yeah, I think since we started our business back in 2019, we were at a point where we provided the physical assessment for customers. So they would kind of like try our stock out. We would go to them, we'd meet them, and we might have an occupational therapist in the room. And because of COVID and this kind of forcing to move technology, what we're now doing is we've gone from doing kind of, I would say, a 60-40, 70-30 split of physical to virtual to now 100% virtual. And we now send our stock out to OTs to then undertake assessments themselves. And what that's done is it's saved us the time of actually traveling, the cost of that, and obviously with the energy and fuel prices all going up, it's made everything so much more leaner for us, and really enables us to maximize our kind of profit margins because we don't have all of that additional expense. So it's just streamlined everything so nicely for us. Of course, there is challenges because there's certain things you can't do virtually that you can only really do in a room. And so we really had to try to maximize how we change those assessments when we do them. And so it's kind of having a very good relationship with OTs and basically disclosing more information before you have a virtual assessment, because of course with physical, there's so much more that you can pick up on. And so being better prepared for those virtual meetings has worked really well. So for us, it's actually been a blessing in disguise, I would say.
Yeah, I think that's the same of a lot of businesses. You know, it was a chance to sort of pause and reset. Cheryl, you work with, you know, so many businesses. I'd love to get your experience and your thoughts on that question.
Yeah, I mean, sort of picking up on what most people have said, I think the move to virtual has been the biggest thing for me. So obviously I was doing, you know, working with a lot of different organisations, doing sort of consultancy and training, most of which was face to face. So even though, you know, for years and years people have been using, you know, Zoom and other tools, etc., but it wasn't really until the pandemic hit that I guess, you know, Zoom really took off. And certainly for me, my business, in terms of what I do and what my associates do, that really opened up the markets to certainly more international and global companies. So, you know, global companies could find us before online, right? But I guess they'd never really necessarily think of coming to you, and we'd not necessarily think of those markets as opportunities. But now, you know, delivering training and consultancy into, you know, US companies and European companies, it seems to have been made much easier because we've been become so much more comfortable with the virtual. I think there is still a lot to learn around how virtual works, and I think Joe might have said, and Josh as well, it's very difficult actually to beat the personal touch still, and to beat the in-person interaction. And there's something about how do we still enable the richness of interaction and connection on virtual. So I think that's still a challenge for businesses.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I know you mentioned Zoom being around forever, but if I'm completely honest, pre-pandemic, I don't think I'd willingly done more than one or two Zoom calls, because I always just thought, well, to win the business and to build that relationship, I have to go and see them face to face. And being based in Cardiff, it would often be a full day out to go and do a 1 hour meeting. Whereas now, I don't know about you, the challenge that I find is actually we don't allow for any of that in between time between meetings. So we often find ourselves sort of Zoom call, and then you need to run and get a coffee or go to the toilet or answer the door or something. So I think that we need to, technology's been incredible to streamline so many things, but we also maybe need to be a bit kinder to ourselves and not completely overwhelm ourselves with commitments because they're so easy.
Yeah, I definitely think the time management and organisation tools around it have become more important. So whether people use, scheduling things like Acuity or Calendly or whatever it be, alongside, things like Zoom, as you say, to manage your diaries, I think has become more important.
Yeah, I completely agree. So we've talked about, how tech has affected yourselves and your businesses and maybe streamlined operations and enabled new ways of doing business and thinking. But what about when it comes to, your consumers? And obviously I'm expecting we're going to get quite different answers here, but how these new streams of engaging with consumers that might once have been face to face, now digital. How are they embracing it? Is there a reluctance? Was there an education sort of play there? And Joe Dalton, if I could get maybe your experience from some of the businesses that you've been working with.
Yeah, I think firstly for JD & Co, we work with lots of founders and the funders of those businesses because we're building the boards, and some of them love a shared Slack channel, or they love a client portal that they can access 24/7. So it suits them to engage with us on a project when it works for them. But there are others that do not want to know about our technology. They want a phone call. They want even a voice note. They prefer a voice note on WhatsApp than actually engaging with us through the professional channels. And then I think when it comes to the clients that we work with, lots of startups that are bootstrapped, they tend to do what I do, which is work on automating all the things that you can that don't impact the business, holiday planning systems, payroll, Calendly, all of those things, invoicing, accountancy platforms, so that you can focus on the people. So I think it's not looking at automating things for automating's sake, but automating the things that are going to enable you to spend more time focusing and obsessing over your customers or your consumers.
Thank you. Jo, Beauty Kitchen, Jo, would you agree with that?
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think for us, when it comes to going into COVID in 2020? Goodness, I'll lose track. The majority of our business was in bricks and mortar retailer because we had only just broke exclusivity with Holland and Barrett, and we'd only just launched in Boots and Sainsbury's at that time. And so about 90% of our sales were coming from bricks and mortar stores. So as you can imagine, even though those stores were actually allowed to stay open, it was a big difference because the footfall dropped considerably. And what has happened over the last couple of years is that the mix within our business has actually de-risked our business. So when we look at an actual sales number from a turnover perspective, we haven't actually grown. But what's happened is our business has become more profitable. So we are roughly a third bricks and mortar, a third specialist retailers, and a third direct to consumer. I don't know if that would have happened. That wasn't direct to consumer, was not part of our strategy. We're a self-funded business, and to do direct to consumer, it's not as simple. It's very costly. It's very heavy on resource. And our route to market had always been bricks and mortar. So I think it's interesting that sometimes when a challenge comes up, you're forced to obviously pivot and do things in a different way. And then once the dust settles, we're now looking at, okay, goodness, the direct to consumer business is really huge for us. And we now have the resource to be able to support that part of the business. And that just wouldn't have happened, one, for the backdrop of COVID and all of the other changing backdrops, but two, having easy access to technology that's relatively straightforward for a direct consumer business, i.e. Shopify for us.
Yeah. And Josh, I'm really interested to understand from you how, the impact of streamlining those meet and greets and sales with your consumers, your customers has impacted them, because it's, I guess it's a very different process and needs for someone purchasing from yourself as to purchasing, something from an online supermarket. So I'd love to get your experience.
Yeah, I think Joe hits on a really important point around the cost of selling direct to consumer. It's a real challenge, and since we started, that's all we've predominantly been. And when you're trying to sell complex medical products, where you're trying to get customers to buy direct rather than having assessments, of course, they're trying to do self-assessments themselves and trying to get measurements to get the right equipment for them and understand some of the nuances of different types of equipment. It's not something you can necessarily just automate because, of course, humans are different in lots of different ways, and what might suit one person may not suit another. And actually, to do that from an automated point of view, it's very hard to do that because, of course, you need personal preference as long as a professional view of being assessed by an OT. And it's almost kind of very difficult to do. And so it's kind of left us in a very limbo state where we kind of have to do as much as we can. The customers still want that conversation with us rather than an automated chat on a screen. It doesn't really help. It just mainly complicates the issue. And so, we still have a challenge today. It's not something we've solved, and I think it will always continue to really be there. It's just how we try and make it as easy as possible, really. So it remains a challenge for us, basically, Francesca.
Thanks, Josh. There's some amazing questions coming in, so I want to make sure that we get around to those and actually answer what people are asking. So we've got one that's directed at Joe, but actually I'd like to find out everybody, and I don't know which Joe. I'm guessing it's Joe Dalton, but I'm not sure. So we're going to get everybody's responses. I can see Sanjay's been kind enough to type a response in already. So I don't know who this question's come from. It says anonymous, but it says, Joe, do you see this trend in remote working continuing? We're already seeing a return to the London office-based job ads. It's detrimental to the levelling up aims of the UK and a real missed opportunity. So I think, Joe Dalton, I will come to you first on that. And I think maybe it would be good for us to share where we're also based, because I think that we are all spread out, and whether our geography impacts what our thinking is on that question.
Yeah, it's a constant topic of conversation. I think that there is not a single client that we are working with at the moment that expects presenteeism, in the office Monday to Friday. 100% of the people that we work with are adopting hybrid working, but the nuances around the small print of hybrid working and what that actually means is there's a lot more rigor around it. So, for instance, tech companies during the pandemic were celebrating you can work from anywhere, work from the beach, etc., etc. What we're actually seeing at the moment, especially for leaders of those companies, is that actually the legal entity isn't set up. There isn't the framework actually to allow employees to work anywhere. So I think that there's a bit of a reality check going on at the moment, and as an employer as well, I would say we're based in Berkshire, but we work with clients all over the world. But I love the fact that I can employ people that live locally who actually want to get out of their homes and want to come into an office a couple of days a week, and then from here they can talk with clients all over the world.
Thanks so much, Joe. Sanjay, I know you answered it in text to the person that asked the question, but I'd love to elaborate on your thoughts there, and whether you think that it's detrimental to the levelling up aims of the UK, and do you see remote work continuing?
Yeah, so I totally see remote work continuing. But like Joe said, I think there's a learning process on how the hell it actually works, right? And so I think we've all seen people have left London and gone back home, wherever home is. And I think that is really fantastic for levelling up. We've recruited across the UK, and that's been great for us. Just like Joe said, it's increased the talent pool tremendously for us. And we found recruiting, especially into tech, much, much easier than previously. And tech's always been, a hard place to recruit. But we're still learning ourselves, right? We're a small organization. We've only got 20 employees, but one of our team wanted to move to India. And on the face of it, that's actually okay. Same hours, all of that kind of stuff. Is a developer, that's great. But then you hit the problem of, well, how secure is data and what we do for a developer who can access all of our systems from a non-EU country? And that's a problem. And we haven't actually solved it. For now, we said, actually, you've got to come back to the UK. Not the greatest answer, but I think we'll solve it over time. So I think the world's still learning how to do work from home anywhere, but I think it's here to stay. When you've got giants like Airbnb saying, hey, full team can work remotely, that's not going to change. And they're a giant, and they're not the only ones. I think there are other giants saying it, but there's increasingly companies who are starting out as remote only and remote first. And so, we do that, but we're a tiny company. Companies that are ahead of us and much, much further ahead of us. Someone like Olio, right? The probably the leading tech for good company in the UK is remote only, right? So that's how they started. That's how they are. They're Series C, probably the biggest tech for good company out there. Someone like Hotjar, so it's been around for a lot longer. Again, remote only. That's how they started. And that's years ago, pre-pandemic kind of stuff. So I think it's here to say, I just think it will take us time to figure out how it works for every company. There's plenty of industries that are going to be slower than others to adapt. And then for you as an individual, you need to choose, right? Do I want to work for a company that adapts that fast or not?
Yeah, absolutely. Great answer. Cheryl, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, no, I completely agree. I think some companies are still going through the challenge of how do we make it work, and there is something about potentially using technology. I think it was Joe Dalton that maybe mentioned collaborative tools like Slack and Trello and things like that. So there is tech that can help, because I know that one of the other concerns for some companies is productivity. So depending on the type of culture that you've got in your business, there can be those challenges of, oh, I'm not sure that people are doing a full day's work, if that makes sense. And although we'd all love to believe that everybody has cultures where you can just trust everybody and everybody's adults and all of that sort of thing, certainly some businesses are starting to, kind of have their doubts, hence why they're now calling people back into the office. I do think that the cost of energy crisis is maybe going to challenge that assumption, but there is something about, can you use technology to make sure that you set really clear objectives for individuals in terms of the output that you need from them, etc., so that you're not having to breathe down their necks or micromanage them or make sure that they're present, on MS Teams or whatever it is. So there is something about how you use tech properly to really support kind of a remote workforce. It's definitely here to stay. I think remote workforces, absolutely.
Yeah, Joe, I think you were going to jump in.
Yeah, I was just about to jump in. So my professional background is HR. So I was head of HR for Avon Cosmetics back in the day, and I've worked for some large corporations. And I think the HR team is the team, whether that's a person, a consultant, or you've actually got a team of HR, they're the ones that can give the sort of direction. And for me, I think that's a great opportunity for the HR department, because a lot of the times they don't necessarily get a seat at the table, so to speak, because a lot of businesses are very focused on, the finances of the business or the tech of the business rather than the people aspect. The other thing to be mindful here is about inclusivity, and for me, remote working, that's all it is. I don't think that's very inclusive, if I'm totally honest, because that doesn't necessarily play to everyone's, style. And I think having a one-stop shop, as in being in the office all the time or not being in the office, I'm not really sure. I think it's this blend of working, and that blend then helps to build your culture within your organization, because you'll always have, doubts that people are doing what you think they're doing, whether they're in the office or not, if I'm honest. Do you know what I mean? So coming back to Cheryl's point, having those policies, procedures, and making sure that your managers are supported, then I think that's the key here to this sort of blended way of working.
Yeah, I completely agree. I had a question, but I've noticed that Stephen Thayer has written it far more beautifully and better than I would. So I'm going to read his question, which I can see, again, Sanjay's provided an answer to in text. But please bear with me because it's a little bit long and I'm going to read it. So Stephen says, in Crossing the Chasm, Geoffrey Moore draws a clear distinction between innovators and early adopters' attitudes towards technology adoption versus early majority, late majority, or laggards attitudes. The innovators and early adopters are willing to bear the pain of being early adopters because they perceive that the benefits of being an early adopter outweigh the pains. Conversely, the more conservative majority want the business benefits to be proven and clear. It's a return on investment decision based on a more marginal gain. They're more hesitant of the downside of early adoption and want someone else to pave the way first, accepting that the return will be smaller because the technology is more widely distributed. Is an efficiency gain rather than a huge source of competitive advantage. Sorry, it's an efficiency gain. I'm curious if the panel see this distinction between the two groups and what your thoughts are. And I'm going to go to Sanjay first again.
Yeah, I thought it was a great question, and absolutely think the distinction is there and very evident in multiple places. For us, when we started out, and we started out selling to businesses about 2 years ago, for us, very clearly, we weren't going to win the giants straight off. So it was where do we think we can find early adopters who would like what we do? And that's most companies. Most companies like what we do because we help their employees do good deeds in the local community or take sustainability actions. So most people like that, but who are we actually going to convince to use us when we're just starting out? And it's not going to like giant enterprises. It's probably focusing on SMEs and high growth tech companies. So that's where we started, and we signed over 100 of those in our first year. So really, really great adoption from clearly early adopters of something that didn't exist before. 2 years in, we're starting to win people like Domestic in General, Apple, Skipton Building Society, and other financial institutions, like absolute giants. But in a strange way, I still see them as early adopters. What we won were a load of SME early adopters, and we now don't think, the people that come on board now as SMEs probably aren't as early adopters. But in the enterprise space, someone like Domestic and General signing up with us, wow, that's I still see them as an early adopter, just in a different genre and market base for us. So hopefully that's some of the answer. I totally think it then leads to more people paying attention. Just had some press on the back of Domestic and General launching with us. I'm sure there'll be plenty more. Because of that, we're starting to see other leads come in purely because we've won someone like Domestic and General. So I definitely think there's early adopters that then other people that wait or aren't as early on seeing trends or changes start paying attention once they see others get involved. So yeah, I really agree with your comment.
Thank you. I can see lots of nods there. Anyone want to jump in?
I'm definitely in the early adopter camp. I'm really grateful for those early adopters. I'm a female founder in a landscape where most headhunting firms are owned by middle-aged white men and have been for the last 50 years. And I would argue that that's why there's so little diversity amongst the boards and the leadership teams. And so I found setting up a business that's focused on those disruptors and those early adopters, they were more inclined to give me a chance as a new company and a female founded company. And I think they're more interested in adopting technology, but they're more interested in adopting lots of different new ways of working. And that's why I love the sector and will continue to support it.
Fantastic. Anybody else?
Yeah, just to add in to build really on what both Joe and Sanjay said, and I guess back to the question as well, we do all tend, as humans, we tend to have this bias, which is loss aversion. We tend to want to avoid losses, which means in terms of early adopters, especially around tech, most people are going to be in the camp of, oh, I'll wait and see, because they're maybe worried about the risks of early adopting. But I think Joe and Sanjay really hit the nail on the head in terms of with your sort of founder-led businesses, maybe your smaller business entrepreneurs tend to be a more optimistic bunch. So we probably are more likely to sort of take the chance on a new piece of tech. But it was interesting, as I was reading the question, I was thinking about the fact that I'm overdue kind of updating to the latest version of iOS Apple software, because I'm always scared that I'm going to get a glitch, if I kind of go ahead before there's been a few days to work it out. So we probably kind of wear slightly different hats depending on what the technology is. But I think the question's right in terms of, I think the majority of people do tend to avoid being the early adopters, but certainly if you can find those businesses that will take that chance on you, that's kind of where the gold is, isn't it? I think.
Yeah, I've never related to a comment more there, Cheryl. I'm constantly hitting the no, do it in 24 hours, do it in 24 hours. That sort of brings me quite nicely onto the next question, because bringing in new tools and technology, it doesn't always go smoothly. Has anybody here had any problems or challenges with any tech they've integrated into their business, and how have they dealt with that? And Joe Chidley, can I come to you first?
Yeah, I just want to build, because you're right, in terms of the two questions are quite connected. What happens with much larger organizations, and this is what we've found. So we have Beauty Kitchen, which is an indie beauty brand, and we have which is a reusable packaging platform. Yeah. And what does that mean? Well, in the UK or globally, we create 161 million tons of single-use plastic packaging every year. I mean, I don't know how many zeros that is, but it's too much. Yeah, 99% of it is single use, and the 1% that's reusable isn't smart and trackable. And that's really what we've done. But the challenge that we've had as a business is that it's not just about creating a new packaging format. It's about creating a full infrastructure, because just because it's reusable doesn't necessarily mean to say that it gets reused. Similar to recycling, just because it says it's recyclable doesn't mean to say it gets recycled. recycled. And this is what's interesting, I think, in terms of tech, is being able to have the ability to create an infrastructure on a very small level so that you can have a minimum viable product where you have lots of different businesses that are creating a circular model. Now, the challenge here is that's very disruptive. When it comes to large organizations, the status quo is profitable. I mean, that is what it is. And that's what, was it Stephen that had put in the question, this idea of risk. I think it's actually more than that. I think there's something that's moving from a linear way of doing business to a more circular way of doing business. That means that you have to actively collaborate and you have to share and open source. And again, I think that's where tech have led the way, because open source is just generally part of their DNA in how they do things. So I just wanted to add that in, that I think this concept of profitability, that being the only lever that we look at, is really quite obsolete. And I think that is how we look at risk. We look at risk from a financial perspective, not necessarily from a people perspective or a planet perspective. And I think the more that we start to do that, the better for all businesses to be future-proofed. And that's where the early adoption for me comes in. And now I've forgotten what the question was.
Well, it was just if there's any
sorry. So coming to
challenges with the
the big one for us is is MS Teams. So again, Microsoft reminds me of Japanese cars. So when you look at a Mitsubishi, it does all of these things, like thousands and thousands of things, when really all you want is to drive a car. Yeah, and I always find Microsoft like that as well. It does all of these thousands of things, but actually nobody has any idea how to actually do it. And because it was so ahead, I think they're still trying to catch up. So we have implemented Microsoft Teams, and I would say it's taken us 2 years to realize that MS Teams connects all of the other aspects, whether that's an individual, workflow app that we're using from Asana to Trello, for example, all the way through to other Microsoft Office products. So for us, not being a tech company per se, but having to access the tech, it's the basic day-to-day stuff that's had been a challenge to us.
Absolutely. And I can definitely see that somebody in the room is in agreement, because I keep seeing little hearts and laughing faces and things coming up across the screen. I could see a lot of nods there as we were going through that question. Anybody, else care to share when, the implementation of something new technology wise has caused them some challenges and how they overcame it?
I've certainly led teams through periods where we've made upgrades to our CRM system, and our whole comm system has gone down internally. And I think the most important thing as an employer is just to remember just how stressful it is and how stressful technology can be on people when it goes wrong. And as the sort of, the boss, the line manager, to show huge amount of empathy and almost over communicate. We have a WhatsApp group actually for the whole company, just in case all of our other systems go down, just so that we can chat to each other and just, I think, vent and take out our frustrations. But I would recommend to small business owners, when you are upgrading, obviously you can plan forever, but inevitably sometimes things go wrong. But just to really over communicate and empathize until you get through the other end. And then I normally go in a dark room and scream away from the team.
Absolutely. No, I completely agree. Cheryl, Josh, have either of you guys got anything to add there?
Cheryl, can I hop in?
You go ahead, Josh.
Okay, thanks. Really interesting. From a very small business starting out, I was lucky to get some investment. However, I know there's organizations out there that don't necessarily have a lot of money to start. And interestingly, if I look at the dynamics of my team, we did have a hybrid of those that weren't so tech savvy to a couple of us that were very tech savvy. And actually, when you're in a very lean environment, trying to create an inventory management system that you can't yet afford, but you need to use things like Zapier, Trello to start automating and creating an inventory type management system for you. Actually trying to get those that aren't so tech savvy to understand the logistics of how that works, and when things go wrong and automated processes don't quite work the way you want them to, it creates a bit of a problem. And so one of the things I've had to do is create a running stock count of my inventory. And one of the challenges we had was actually trying to maintain that count, but whilst also trying to implement this process of using Zapier and Trello to do some of that heavy lifting. So we weren't having altered all of those manual counts, but getting the staff to be able to come up to that level with the tech has been a bit of a challenge, and we're still not quite there, right? It's still not working as seamlessly as we want. But the way I see it is, if we can prevent, 30 to 40% of effort a week on doing stock managing and taking count of it, and reduce that by 15, 20%, for me, that's a win, right? Even though I've not got rid of the problem, I'm still reducing that time to, take control or manage that stock level. So I think as a very small business, using technology like that can be advantageous, but if depending on the makeup of the employees that you have, that can be a real barrier.
Yeah, Cheryl?
Yeah, no, I'd completely agree with that. I was going to say, actually, specifically around, sort of like when making tech decisions and when you're going through things like upgrades, the one thing I was going to say was not to be afraid to stop doing something. So in one of the businesses that I work in, we were sort of trying to implement this new system to sort of manage some of the portfolio, and it was taking up a lot of internal staff time. And we just had to make the decision to basically pause it because we decided that the tech maybe wasn't ready. And we've actually jumped back on, a year afterwards when, a few bugs have been ironed out, and it's been much better rather than costing us lots of money. So I think there's something about not being afraid to stop, when something is going wrong, but also just picking up on what Josh said. So one of the things we often ask ourselves when we're looking at anything, whether it's the smallest thing, so it could be DocuSign or, whatever it be, but I'm always asking, does it already integrate with the things that we use already? Because I don't just want lots of bolt-on bits of tech that don't talk to each other, especially, as Josh was saying, if you haven't got a team that's all completely tech savvy, you kind of want it to be really easy for bits that talk to each other. And I think for SMEs, where you don't necessarily have your own in-house IT function and all of that stuff, you kind of need to be using really robust technology platforms that are out there, but hopefully ones that talk to each other really well, so that they're kind of doing the bits of joining up for you in the middle. So yeah,
couldn't agree more on that. Well, Mark actually asked, you just mentioned then, we're all from small businesses. We haven't necessarily got a tech support department. But how do you use tech support? How does that work in your organizations? Whose responsibility is it, maintaining platforms and that sort of thing? Would be great to hear from yourself, Sanjay.
So we've got a team of 5 in tech. Really, for us, that's more development. So they develop out. We're app-based, we're desktop-based. We've got a live data dashboard that all of the corporates that work with us have. So our tech team really supports all of that. We don't really have a tech support team. And so I guess across our roughly 20 employees, we use a whole bunch of different bits of kit. We're fully remote, so we use Slack a lot. We have a whole bunch of other bits of like CRM tools and all that kind of stuff, but the majority of them are, I guess, third party. And there was a comment about this somewhere else on the thread. They're third party from large corporations, and I think there was a comment earlier around, hey, is there any way to avoid that? And I don't know if there's a way to avoid that reliance on some of the large companies. Hey, we're on Zoom right now. Is there a way to avoid that? I think painfully, we've probably all experienced 10 different types of video conferencing things, so it gets painful. So we don't really have a tech support function, but we do rely on, I guess, off-the-shelf bits of kit and SaaS products from a whole bunch of different providers.
Thank you. Joe Chidley, what about Chidley? What about you? Keep tripping over my tongue then with your surname, so apologies about that.
No, I thought I had already answered this question at the beginning. Why not?
If you've got a tech support function. If you have,
Oh,
I
sorry.
apologize.
Goodness gracious me, I'm losing it this morning. I do apologise. I'll let everybody know up front. I tested positive for COVID at the weekend, so it hasn't been the greatest week. So I do have a bit of brain fog, and I wasn't sure if I was going to make it this morning. I'm not looking for sympathy. I'm just letting everybody know that I'm normally quite on it. No, we don't have a tech support at all. We have a basic outsource company that sets up things like emails and different, sort of basic stuff. We're all relatively, I would say, tech savvy. When I'm talking about that, I don't mean from a development perspective, but I mean from an everyday. We tend to use anything that's new. I'm a little bit of a nerd when it comes to new things, and trying to understand. So for instance, we don't use WhatsApp, we use Signal as an example, which is, the same, only different for lots of different reasons. And I think when you are a purpose-led business, you're generally looking at other purpose-led businesses. And although we do have Microsoft Office as a backdrop, that's almost the tradition of the foundation of what we use alongside all of the smaller startup and generally purpose-led. We want to take chances on tech, and we have 18 employees in total, so we're not a huge team. And generally, if somebody comes up with an idea of something that they want to trial, most of us will lean in and trial that to see if that's something that will work for our business. So our tech support team really is kind of culturally across everyone that works here.
Yeah, I think that's really relatable to most small businesses, certainly us too. Look, we're surprisingly, or not surprisingly, because I knew it would be a great conversation, but we're drawing in on the last 10 minutes. And there's a great question that's been asked. And I think that it's one of those real high value questions when you ask people, to list some of the tools and the bits of tech that they just simply adore or couldn't do without. And I'm going to throw a few in. There's the obvious one, that I think many of us use, Slack, which has absolutely transformed our internal comms. Was an absolute nightmare to try and get people to do it initially, but I don't think we send any internal emails now at all, which is wonderful. And then there's a few that have come out of our sort of entrepreneurs community and people that I feel like I'm fortunate to be connected with on LinkedIn and find out about their products. So there's one that I'm using at the moment called Trumpet, which has been built by Nick Telson, who created Design My Night. And I think it's still in beta mode. So I think I can invite people, if anyone wants to have a look, drop me a note. But it's been transformational in me putting together proposals because I can do them and in sort of building blocks and create this living document pod for clients from the point of selling to them to the point of contract delivery and review and all of that. It's wonderful. The other one that I absolutely adore is we create an awful lot of content, and there's an organization called Shout Out. And again, they're a partner of ours. Get in touch if anyone wants to find out more. But they essentially allow us to create video content at scale. So, for example, if we get 5,000 applications for the Great British Entrepreneur Awards and we want to create a branded video for everyone, there was a time where that would have meant us sending a videographer all up and down the UK. Obviously, that's not cost effective, and iPhones and webcams are super powerful. But then there was a time when, we might have got people to send in their videos and then topped and tailed them and branded them ourselves. That's a waste of resource. So what Dan Gable has created is essentially this tool where you brand a video, you create your top, you create your tail, you create your captions, you send out the super magic link to everybody that you want to contribute. They type in what their name is, the business they're from, and once they record the video, you get within a minute the most incredible branded video. So it could be used for testimonials, lots and lots of ideas, but they are two things that really, really helped me over the last couple of years to save time, be more efficient, and to do the things that I want to do easier. Sanjay, can I ask you for I'm not going to be too prescriptive, however many you want to give.
Yeah, so the one that's been the bedrock from day one, we haven't transferred from it yet. Maybe there will be a day when it gets there, but we have a CRM system, I think fairly well known. It's Intercom. But Intercom allows us to interact with, we have 25,000 employees that use our system now to volunteer. But whenever they have a query, and whether they do it on chat, whether they do it via a site, whether they do it on chat on the app, whether they do it by email, it all comes into one place. We don't miss it. You can prioritize based on partner size or whatever else you want to do. And we use the same system with our referrers as well. So that's just been the bedrock of how we communicate really effectively across everyone that uses our system. So yeah, it's worked fantastically. We've had a couple of chats about cost occasionally with the team there, but it's worked really well. And for anyone that does DBS checks, we tried out a few different companies. The one that's worked very nicely for us is UCheck. I'm sure there's others that are efficient, but they seem really quick, reasonable price, and very quick.
Wonderful. Joe, Chidley. I'll get it right. I can't even blame COVID.
You can just blame my husband for it. Do you know what I mean? That's
I know it. I know someone with the surname Chidgey. So when I see it, it just is the automatic thing, and I can see somebody's having a giggle on there.
Well, you know, at least we've cheered somebody up. I mean,
at least I know you well enough to make that mistake.
Yeah, very much so. I have no problem. I've been called worse, as they say. I think for me, it's all around the social aspect. So social media, obviously we have, I mean, every day I feel, why should we have to spend money with Facebook, Instagram, Meta in general? And, you know, it would be great to see more of the younger startups coming through social media. So Be Real is something that now I know it's still quite big. It's something that we've been trialing internally as a business to just try and understand how we can localize our community base, because, you know, when it comes to beauty kitchen products, generally what happens is we have a really great conversion rate. So if somebody buys a product from us, our return rate is, you know, over 80%, and generally that doesn't happen. And the reason for that is that it's not just about the skincare, because, you know, when it comes to skincare, there's loads of amazing skincare out there. It's around that personal touch of how do you then follow up with your community. So for instance, when it comes to customer service queries, we do use Zendesk, which is fairly straightforward, but actually it's me that answers all of the questions, you know, but it means that we have the power for me to be able to do that in a timely manner. So that would be mine.
Thank you so much. Josh?
Just to mute myself there. Yeah, I think there's, from a slightly different angle, this is more from a kind of a leader role, looking at kind of brainstorming. I think back in the early days, we'd probably be in a room doing whiteboard sessions, and it was very quick in a group to just map everything out. And one of a really a really cool piece of software that I've been using recently is called Mural. So for those of you who don't know, if you've never used it, it's absolutely fantastic for really complex business situations where you're trying to map out different journeys. It's brilliant. Also, Coggle is another really fascinating tool. Go and Google it. I'm not going to bore you with it, but again, it's great for brainstorming and getting thoughts out. And finally, I think from an operational point of view, I would say Xero from an accounts perspective. I know there's lots of other startups out there that offer kind of accountancy packages. And I know there's a few at GBEA as well, but Xero for us has been fantastic. It streamlines all of that accountancy. We don't have to pay so much to our accounts team for filing annual accounts. It allows us to file VAT returns straight to HMRC. And again, that's just been a fabulous bit of kit for a very small company to be able to manage your own accounts without necessarily having to pay extortionate sums of money for an accountant. So that's been a lifesaver for us. So that's my three.
Thank you so much. Joe Dalton?
Yes, I think for us, it's also Slack. We were one of the early adopters, funnily enough, and then just being able to not have any internal email has just really helped communication. But I think we tend to work with whatever our clients' systems are, because we're a services business. So some are on WhatsApp, some are on Telegram, some are on Signal, WeChat, I would say one I would look at, we've already talked about accounting systems, but anything that helps automate and make people feel important employees in small companies, whether it's Timetastic to sort of manage holidays and sickness, or Charlie HR or Bamboo, or any of those other systems, I think can give SMEs the advantage over their bigger competitors, just by making sure that they feel like they have some sort of self-service and ability to manage and track their employment, whether it's learning platforms, whatever. There's some really great ones out there. And I would say just always set up a small user group so that you've got 2 or 3 people in the company that are going out and trialing it before you then adopt it across the business.
Thank you. And Cheryl?
Yeah, I'm gonna be slightly more old school, and so rather than going with some of the newer sort of like more interesting collaborative stuff, I'm gonna go back to basics, and I'm gonna give Google a shout out. So Google Suite, in terms of, you know, just for like storing documents, collaborating, you know, email management, all of that stuff. I think for small businesses is a really good place to start, just in terms of getting organized, and again, you know, potentially has some of those communication tools depending on how you use it, and it's potentially a much cheaper price point to go in, you know, kind of to use some applications rather than your sort of Microsoft alternative. So yeah, I'm gonna pump for Google on this one. I'm not being sponsored, by the way, unfortunately.
Look, I have come to everyone now, haven't I? I'm paranoid that I haven't come to everyone on that question. I think I have. Fantastic. Well, look, it takes us right up until the end of the session, and what an incredible and enjoyable hour this has been. Thank you so much for being part of the Disruptive Minds cohort, and thank you so much to Vodafone Business, who've been key supporters of us and are, you know, really passionate about supporting entrepreneurs with growing their businesses and connectivity. It's been an absolute pleasure. I see that Josh and Sanjay have posted their LinkedIn profiles. If it's okay with the other 3, we'd like to share with the attendees as well, so that we can all expand our networks. And my team and I are going to do our best to summarize those tools and send them around in a follow-up email. So if anybody missed anything, do check your emails and we'll send those over to you. But thank you so much for being part of it. I look forward to seeing many of you in November at the Great British Entrepreneur Awards, and if not before. So have a fantastic evening, fantastic rest of your day and afternoon.
Thanks, Fran.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.